Okay, I think that's our cue. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today at Global Genes Live, a rare patient advocacy unsummit. Apologies for the bit of the delay. I am indeed the culprit. I don't seem to be able to use technology. I can look at myself, I just can't hear myself. So we are excited for our upcoming session, Communication Tools for Accessible Science. My name is Deborah Walter, and I am the Senior Director of Federal Policy and Advocacy at Greenwich Biosciences, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Before we kick it off, I was asked to share a few housekeeping notes. For all attendees that are currently muted, and I guess I am responsible to reduce any of those interruptions, so I have a heavy load I'm carrying today, but I know we have a great team behind us as well. We encourage you to, of course, use the chat function in the On24 window for any questions that you have throughout the session, and I will present them to the speakers. To open the chat, please click on the blue chat button located at the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. And I hope you're way better at that than I am, or else we'll be talking to ourselves here. If there are any questions that I'm not able to be addressed by the speakers, or we run short on time, obviously we'll do our best to follow up after the program. Also, make sure to post any key takeaways and fun moments from the Global Genes Live on social media, and tag at Global Genes for a chance to be featured on our social media channels. The official event hashtag is POUND2020 GG Summit. That's G for Global Gene Summit. Finally, we encourage all of you to participate as active listeners and to take advantage of the opportunity to hear from our leader and experts and hear and ask them questions. The program is your time to learn and find answers on critical challenges in rare disease research. And I'm really pleased today to welcome to our discussion leaders Heidi Grabenstatter, Science Director of International Foundation for CDKL5 Research, and Dr. Jennifer Marlo-Triemstra, our Senior Manager of Medical Affairs at Greenwich Biosciences. They will each share a more complete background as we delve into our conversation. But for starters, I'd like to just invite Heidi to kick things off. Heidi?
Thank you, Deborah. I'm very grateful for the invitation from Global Genes and excited to share a sneak peek of a web-based tool that the International Foundation for CDKL5 Research is working on. The idea behind it is to ask a diverse set of expert voices to share the CDKL5 science to the global community, to digest that science for the CDKL5 patients. And how we're proposing to do that is to ask those scientists to review recently published research. And in asking them to do these reviews, we're not directing them to do that in any one particular way, but instead we're encouraging to be critical and to bring new ideas to the table to discuss potential strengths and weaknesses of the manuscripts. What questions might still be unanswered in the proof of principle of these recently published scientific discoveries, and what additional work remains to be done from the bench to the bedside. What future avenues deserve more investigation. Just like in advocacy, these scientists build their work on the shoulders of other scientists. So it's important that we invite them to communicate where there's still more work to be done. And in doing so, we have to give them, because they're so busy and because in rare disease there's often a small pool of scientists, we have to give them a direction of how best that's done, how lay communications work, because it's a struggle to do that as a scientist. We often talk in a certain kind of language. So the major guidelines are that these need to be written in for the non-scientist, and that non-scientist in our community is the caregiver. They are the voice for the children with CDKL5 deficiency disorder. But as they walk away from these reviews, they should understand the goal, the approach, and the interpretation of the results of the commentary that's been written. But how do we encourage these scientists to do this extra work in addition to what they've already been doing? You have to kind of give them a value proposition for why they should be doing this. Scientists often have journal clubs for their labs and outside labs that they work down the hall with. So how we've proposed to get their ear is that this is a journal club for caregivers, that while they're working on the journal clubs and breaking it down for other professionals that may not be in their field, they could do it one layer deeper for the caregivers and for the patients. And that in doing so, it's professional development for the junior investigators. And that those junior investigators will have more exposure to other experts in their field, and that there's this new community science idea out there for junior investigators. The landscape of science is changing. There's not all those tenure track professor jobs that there used to be. And if they start developing their CV with community science, they might make themselves more marketable for other positions out there in industry. We make sure that this is not for just the international, the IFCR community, but for everyone. So disclosures are there, and that no commercial stakeholders have control, and that we don't support, we don't take funding from any companies that are involved in treatment development, and all authors are required to disclose any conflicts of interest. That's just to reduce bias. So who's delivering the science matters, in that no one really wants to hear it from one loud voice like myself. They want to hear it from the scientists who are in the lab, in the clinics, really involved in the disorder. And they want to hear it from outside perspectives as well. So this is just a taste of what a one review might look like. And what we want the caregivers to have an option to look at is layers of how deep they want to investigate. So there'll be a profile of the author, their affiliations, the original abstract of the manuscript, and then links to the reviewed article. But also all that jargon that's really hard to decipher, there'll be links to explanations and videos and schematics that will better explain. And then the caregiver will have the opportunity to delve as deep as they want to. They can look at the original abstract, or they can look at definitions, however deep or as shallow as they want to go. And with that, I'll conclude and let Tree take over and show you what she's been working on.
Okay. Thank you. So let me advance the slides over. Heidi, these are the slides you were just talking about. Am I correct? This is the information you were just sharing with us?
Yes, I thought I could get you to
I can get over to mine. Yep, I'll
Okay.
get over. I just wanted to make sure that people had an opportunity to see kind of what you were talking about there. So a lot like what Heidi was saying, a lot of the information that we share at Greenwich, it can be complicated, and it's a very complex science. And so at Greenwich, as you may be aware, we work with cannabinoids and cannabis, and it's really to extract the molecules and make them into medicine through the FDA pathway. And when we start talking about this, I mean, all of you probably have Googled something about cannabis or cannabinoids and quickly fell into the rabbit hole of what is all of this? And what does this all mean? And what does terms even mean? So we also struggle with communicating this science, but in an accessible manner that can be digestible, that can be contextualized in a way that can be used. It's actually user-friendly, and then you can make and be empowered to make an educated decision, even have an educated discussion about around this. So one of the areas, one of the ways that we do this is we have a talk. Let me back up here. We have a talk that we give called Cannabis, Where Are We Now? And within there, though, it really kind of highlights really one of the basic questions that we ask is, what's the difference between cannabis and cannabinoids? And that question right there really can be a teaser, because a lot of times people don't know the difference between cannabis and cannabinoids. They see it all lumped together. And we recognize that. So we kind of take a step back and go, okay, well, let's talk about terminology. What do these terms mean? What's a scientific term versus a legal term, a marketing term? And we try to, we have this talk, and we try to make sure we have the hour with people to kind of help them take that deep dive and walk through. But in the end, we know you're not done learning, and your learning has to keep going and keep growing. So we've developed a website, an educational website, unbranded. No branding on there. We have a team of medical writers as well working with us. It's an evidence-based approach to cannabinoid science. And it's a multi-layer, multi-dimensional website in that we have text, we have video, we have downloads. And so we really want to make sure there's a whole litany of resources so that no matter who you are, if you are a healthcare provider who's looking to prescribe or certify, or if you are a caregiver looking, what is my next decision, there's resources there to start that conversation. We also have listed on there continuing education opportunities. You don't have to be a medical provider to do CME and CE, but it's an opportunity to find a place where there's cannabinoid and cannabis information. And we also understand, too, that it can be a fire hose of information. There's so much out there. So we've developed 2 subscribers, newsletters, one's monthly and one's quarterly, that really kind of breaks it down and gives it in tidbits. Again, allowing it to be accessible science, not an overwhelming amount of science, but an opportunity for people to get in, go at their pace, go at their learning level, and work their way through the science so that they can walk away, again, empowered to have an educated discussion so that they can make an educated decision. Deb?
Well, thank you both. Very much appreciate what you've shared with us today, and I would love others now to weigh in. This is the time to ask questions, and I'll just start it off as we're waiting for questions. And one thing, and I know I experience all the time working for Greenwich, is that there's a lot of junk science out there. There's a lot of misleading information, inaccurate, sometimes deliberate information. And so how do patients and caregivers and advocates best equip themselves to evaluate the quality of the scientific information? Are there any, for example, red flags to look for? And just one sort of anecdote on that. If this isn't a red flag, I don't know what is. there are a lot of claims, and Tree knows this, in terms of what apparently CBD can cure everything. This is a miracle drug. And one of the claims that I saw that really sort of made me chuckle was that it allows cancer cells to commit suicide. And, it's just kind of a silly claim, and it makes you sort of laugh. But at the same time, there are a lot of people, this information is out there, you get bombarded with it. To me, that's a red flag, but maybe not so much for others. So again, sorry to go on here, but I would love to hear from both of you of how you sort of begin to evaluate or separate fact from fiction here. And, what other challenges do we have as you're sort of thinking about how to dispel these myths?
Yeah, you mentioned CBD and a lot of the claims that are out there that are pretty egregious. And when it comes to the cannabis and cannabinoid space, I think the number one thing anyone can do is just brush up on terminology. And it can be hard to find a reliable resource, but sometimes you need to, I think the source matters. I think you need to just kind of take a step back. There's many academic sites that do start to, start to look into what are these terms, what do the words mean. I know that on our website we have a glossary of terms that helps just get you started to speak the language. Then once you get a handle on that, going out into the Google sphere or searching through the internet, you start to pick up on sites that don't actually have an accurate definition, and that should be a red flag right there, that if they don't have an accurate definition for the terms, or they're kind of smoke and mirroring the terms, or if they're making claims that just sound too good to be true, you're probably in the wrong site. And you just back out and go somewhere else and try to find more reliable information. Heidi?
I think the scientific process is an important one to discuss, and maybe that's a primer. In addition to what we've discussed as the published research, having a primer about peer review and how science comes to be published, and where the review team that looks at a paper is not necessarily capable of recognizing when misconduct is going on. That's, they can look at what's there, and they can review the paper on its merits, but if someone's not being necessarily honest about data, two reviewers who are looking at a paper are not going to be able to look at a figure when it's not the raw data and be able to recognize that. So walking through those sorts of processes with patients and caregivers and explaining peer review is a first step. And then as patients and as caregivers, we're sometimes more inclined to read the human research because that's what we want to. We want to know how close are we to a treatment. And when we read what we're finding in mice, it's very exciting, but we don't handle that with the fine-tooth comb of, well, how many doses did we give them? And what kind of safety is there? And so the preclinical research is also something that where there's how much do we know and how much is left to be uncovered, because we're so in such a hurry that is very much our as advocates, we're in a hurry to get from point A to point B, and there's nothing wrong with that. But where we need to slow down and be more meticulous is, and who needs to deliver that message. where there might be some discrepancies and reproducibility. This is a really interesting finding, and it gives us hope. Hope is a great thing, but we need to reproduce this in another lab.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you, Heidi. I think that's where it can be frustrating and confusing is when, but I read a paper, or I did read a peer-reviewed journal. I went on PubMed and I pulled it off, or my neighbor who works in science and she helped me look through this thing. Well, there's this one paper that's it, right? We're done. And just recognizing that the scientific process is always continuing to learn and grow the science. And what science does is not only just prove like what's there, it also does a really good job of proving what isn't there. It gives you a lot of no's before you get a yes. And that's the purpose of science, is to let us know what it doesn't do. Here's what it does do, but let's also prove what it doesn't do. So you have that balanced approach to looking at whatever the focus is or you're looking for. There was a question in the chat, if you don't mind me jumping in there, Deb, about how do we write on our websites? And Heidi, I'd love to hear your viewpoint on this. How do you write on the website so you don't overshoot your audience, but also don't undershoot your audience? Like, how do you get that sweet spot? And I know for us on cannabinoidclinical.com, we purposely put in layers of information. So there are pages where it'll have an interpretation box where it'll talk about like the endocannabinoid system. And when you're on the first page, it's written at an 8th grade level. You go to the next page, it's written at an undergraduate level, and you go to the last page and it's written at a graduate level. You can actually go look up how to write different levels of writing. And the purpose of that is that not everyone wants to jump right to that doctorate level. It's a lot to put your head around. But no matter where you are in your education or understanding, you can start at that level and work your way through as you begin to conceptualize and understand it. You can work your way through the website. So we purposely write that way using a website tool. And then also we generally actually just send out to people and ask them, how is it reading? You don't do science at all. Does this make sense to you? Do you understand this? How can we make this better so that you can understand it? Heidi, how about you? What do you guys do?
And I think giving them examples and then asking them for feedback. When I first got the position as a science director, I went to the family conference and I said, how would you like your science? You want the manuscript? And it was like crickets, right? Giving that very open template is hard. But if you design something and you give everybody a couple different examples, then you're going to hear what they like. And I think you have to give several different versions, because there's people who are dealing with very severely ill children, and they have other kids, and they're managing working at the same time, and they don't want to go watch a webinar for 4 hours to learn about that, right? So they want it quick and give me my dirt and get straight to it. And the scientist, and you said there's different communities you're building. You're building the communities of scientists that are now willing to speak at a level that the patients can understand. And you're developing this community of patients that are really ready to engage. And it's at different levels. And there's siblings that they want to sit and they want to watch the movie, and they want to learn about it, and they want to see the DNA and how we can correct the DNA and replace the protein that is missing, and all the different potential therapies that might be in the pipeline, because they're not all gene therapy, right? We have to define the different potential therapies that and how they work differently. And those all take we have visual learners, and we have learners that read and learn, and some of us have to do it 3 different ways before it sinks into our head. And that one one example that I showed, the quick little blip, that was a methods paper in Nature Neuroscience that if I had to sit down and read that paper, it was like, okay, I'm going to sit here for hours before I actually understand that. And, you know, it would be a hard one for me, right? So the fact that he explained he was developing a method where you could see the different cell types turning on and off when there was expression of CDKL5 mRNA and how important that was to the development of the therapies, because then we could see as we were replacing the CDKL5 protein. Then right away, that's grounded in relevancy for the parents, right? And it was less than 1,000 words. So,
Heidi, can I just ask a question on that? And in fact, came up in the chat as well. In terms of reviews of the new research that you're doing, has there been any feedback that this is really beneficial for use by patients and caregivers? Have they expressed, a need for the information to be more digestible? Again, this sounds pretty amazing, but would love just to hear kind of your thoughts on that piece as well, and if there are any continual sort of improvements that you all continue to make, potentially based on any kind of feedback.
So I'll be honest, then it's not new. I got on the phone with Dr. Jeff Carroll, who runs, he ran HD Buzz for years, right? And I asked him, what could I do better? And he said, this is what we do. And this is what we do so that it's transparent. And this is what we do that works really well for the patient community. So they got updates, and they could see it through the newsletter. And not just the patient community subscribes to the newsletter. The scientists subscribe to the newsletter. Industry members subscribe to the newsletter. So he said, it got to be great where people were telling me they turned off their Google alerts because all they had to do was go to the website, and it's not affiliated with our foundation website. It's a separate entity, right? So then you don't come into the issues of, does it belong to, because there's more than one advocacy group, right? So if you say it's for everyone, we don't want ownership. We want everyone to have access to it. We want it to be in multiple languages. It has language translation. I've done the outreach to scientists all over the world. I want the input and output to be diverse, right? But we're in a trial stage. So at this point, what I've asked people is what works for you. And then I'm trying to trial this and make the tweaks where I see it would be beneficial to our community, and just hoping it takes shape and does where we hope for it, and it grows, and the scientists take interest, and we continue to get more articles.
Can I add in there real quick, Deb? Do you mind if I jump in? Heidi, I think one thing, you and I talked about this the other day too, Heidi, is that you mentioned that about how what if you were to go into that neuroscience methods paper and try to digest it as well, it'd be difficult as well for you. And I think that's something that we recognize, Heidi, you and I talked about this, that it's not just patient and caregivers that are in here looking at our information on our websites. It is doctors and scientists and healthcare providers, because some of this is new for them too. And so it's also important for us to realize too that not all caregivers and parents are without their own scientific degree. There are plenty of parents out there who have an advanced degree, and there's also plenty of parents and caregivers out there who actually probably do know more than their healthcare providers, because they're steeped in learning about what's going on with their kid, or what is this rare disease that is afflicting my family member, and they'll do a lot of reading on it. So what a great way to have a resource that is multi-layered, and so that they can work their way through their learning, but also come in to the clinic and be an advocate for that patient or that family member who's going through the choices for medical care.
Thank you for that. I think we could go on and on just on this topic alone, but want to make sure we try to capture some of the audience questions as well. And this is one that is very familiar, I think, to Tree and myself at Greenwich. What are the pros and cons of using CBD? We often hear that CBD is benign; it doesn't hurt, whereas THC is the psychoactive ingredient, and that's the one that gets you high. So that's sort of the good and the bad on that. But Tree, can you elaborate a little bit more on again, just what are the pros and cons of CBD as you see it?
Yeah. That is a whole Pandora's box of a discussion. How much time do we have? I think it's important to recognize that, let's just back up a step. CBD is a molecule. It's a cannabidiol that comes from the cannabis plant or can be derived synthetically in a lab. That molecule is the molecule is the molecule. And so there is a litany of research out there looking at CBD, that molecule, whether it's administered in various forms from a transdermal, putting it on the skin, to being ingested, inhaled. There's many ways that CBD, that molecule, has been tested. In many forms it's been tested. The conclusion is that there are some pros to CBD for the treatment of certain syndromes, and that's been vetted out in clinical research and through the FDA, and of course there's the research, the preclinical research in many animal models that led up and drove that hypothesis through for the FDA approval. There are other formulations that are currently in the FDA pathway as well, as far as being tested in clinical trial. The pros of it are that it depends, and there's research showing that there are some pros to its use in certain syndromes. That's the only proof we have. And again, that gets back to what Heidi and I were talking about, is like, what are the levels of evidence? When it comes to the cons, that's where I really need people to really stop and take a breath, because they're also, with all of that research of how it works, we also found out what it does. So that not only do we know some benefits, we also know some risks. We know there's drug-drug interactions. We know how it gets metabolized in the human body. And we know there can be interactions with food and other drugs. And also, depending on the syndrome, there can actually and other compounds on board, there could be some serious adverse effects. So it's really important that, I say this often, if you're considering using any sort of a cannabis-based product or a CBD product, you really, I can't encourage enough to talk to your healthcare provider, healthcare professionals about it. Make sure you're having that open dialogue so that both of you can have a discussion about it, but then make appropriate decisions as to, is this the route you want to go? And if it is where you're going, making sure then you're following up and being monitored, you or whoever it is that be taking it, because we do know there can be adverse effects and there can be concerns with that. So, but again, it's all we know is what's been proven through clinical trials. Everything else, we just don't know it. It's a lot of what Deb was mentioning before about, big talk of it. It cures everything, and that's just not true. That just isn't true science. That's marketing. That's a marketing of a product. That's not the science of the molecule. Does that help answer, Deb?
It does, and it's interesting that you sort of talk about, and I think it's important to appreciate the marketing and separating the marketing from the science. For both of you, are there any common missteps that you see around educating rare disease patients on new science and therapeutic progress? Again, sort of those pros and cons, and separating the marketing from the true science.
Heidi, you want to start?
I think I alluded to it earlier, the speed that we're at which we're trying to move. The ability for us as advocates to step back and take a breath and discuss with the caregivers and the patients the long road, and sometimes why we only have a chance to do it right once, and what doing it right requires for outcome measures and these sorts of things, that in a clinical trial, if you're trying to capture nonverbal children, the misstep of picking the wrong outcome measure could lead to a non-successful trial with a potentially successful drug. So moving too fast can be a not so not the best approach in some cases. And where we can work together, I think, is the other thing. How you had mentioned negative data, how there could be collaborative efforts where it's not natural in the scientific community necessarily to publicize that. But I think especially in the rare community, our learnings about what doesn't work is really important. And that why waste time on what doesn't work, right? Time is just like moving to time is really an essential aspect. And that was another, the importance of negative results was something else we were hoping to harness. I don't know how much it'll be, because we're not really giving them the scientists say, these are the things you must cover, but we were hoping that would pop up every once in a while, was a negative data covering those topics.
I think, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to piggyback on that, because it's so true for cannabis and cannabinoids. There's so much hype about, oh, it works. I'm like, there is data showing it doesn't work. There are plenty of syndromes and groups, populations where these cannabinoids are not working or could actually be really risky. Where's that data? Like, why isn't that in New York Times or on the, whatever High Times, whatever websites out there? And it's because it doesn't sell. It's not clickbait. People want to hear about something working. They want to believe this is going to work. And so they'll follow the story and get down that rabbit hole of all this positive discussion instead of really being critical. And we as scientists are very critical. I want to see the stats. I want to see the significance. What's the number? Is this actually powered correctly? And does this actually tell me an answer, or does this tell us the next step in our hypothesis and in our answering and asking questions? And if it's just junky and glossy, I question it. I want to know, what is it really? What's the nuts and bolts of it? And that's why the animal data is important, and then it leads to the human data, and the human data grows and grows until it gets more and more people. And then you kind of narrow it down to, and it's something you'd mentioned, Heidi, like there are some populations that when the way the study was set up, we could see it didn't work in a certain population, or we had a signal in another population we didn't expect to see. And now we're going to go down that road and see if it works there. But being able to critically look at that and be empowered to say, I think I can see where this is now. I think that's where we got to go. I think if you believe it's going to work because in your gut you think it works, that's not science. We have to be critical. We have to read it. Let's think about it. And I think Heidi and I are trying our best to set up platforms for you to be able to go in and build your knowledge to you too can be a critical reader and a discerning reader as well.
So thank you for that. And I just wanted to kind of pick up on that and something, one of the questions that was asked by the audience, and we have only about 5 minutes left, so this could be the last question. But and Tree, I think you were alluding to it, so were you, Heidi, that evidence is obviously the first important step. but really to help the public understand what is happening, what is the findings. But correlation is not causation. And so how do we begin to, try to tease that out and explain it accurately, without being too pushy about it, I guess? How do we convey that information, or what should people be looking about for as we comb through the evidence? And oftentimes we'll get the correlation suggests, or this causation, etc. How do we tease that piece out?
Go ahead, Heidi.
I think in my role, that was what I struggled with as the publications were coming out, and those were the sorts of results. Was that we're finding a correlation, and it's not necessarily causative. I had the choice of me personally writing blog posts of that sort, pointing, this is the result and it's exciting, but this is all it says. Me pointing out the strengths and weaknesses, or doing something like this, where you have respected people from the field addressing these issues and trying to give them due credit and building their acumen for speaking to the patient communities. And so we're all sort of building our scientific literacy, and it's bidirectional, right? How we can, it's both how we as patient communities have better scientific literacy, but then the scientists have some things to learn, right? When I write a grant and I have to write the lay summary, it's the hardest part sometimes, right? And it can be painful for a scientist to have to cut out their jargon. So in a sense, this is sort of there's some very special scientists and the clinicians that really love doing this, and they're very good. And there's some others that are going through a training exercise of sorts. But this has to happen, right? This is progress. It may not necessarily, it may be slow, but this is progress that has to happen.
Tree, I'll give you the final word on that, if you have anything to add.
Oh, I was just going to add that I completely agree with you, and I think also it's humbling but also exciting, because I'm always learning. Sometimes I feel like a kid in a candy store, because every time I do science, I get to learn something new, and every time I do education, just like you were saying, Heidi, it taxes your brain. It's hard to do, but it's so fun, because it's something new, and it's a challenge every day to do it right, and it's great to try to do it right. So thank you.
Well, thank you to both of you for presenting today and sharing your thoughts, and to everyone who's out there virtually. It's because of this community that we're coming together and able to put these kinds of forums on. And I think, ultimately what we're hearing here is that information drives empowerment. We don't want to ever stop learning, and that certainly strong communications and patient education can really be a tool in bridging the gaps and building trust. And obviously there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Heidi, you'd mentioned earlier that it's not just, it's not just print, but you do videos and other kinds of ways or approaches to educate outside of the print media. And there's lots to consider here, and hopefully what we're taking away today are just building blocks that you can use and think about in your community. So with that, I will, again, thank you. Thanks to our presenters and everyone out there. And I bid adieu.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.